Hello, everyone. I'm going to turn this over to President Dr. Rebecca Schumacher here of the Florida School Counselor Association. My name is Russ Sabella. Just a couple of technical and procedural notes here. We are on a webinar format. This webinar is being recorded for future replay. We will notify you of any handouts and the location of the replay online. Because we have lots of attendees today, we're not going to use our phone lines, but instead, if you have a question or a comment, please put those in the questions area. So I'll be monitoring those and helping Nicole and Mark out. We can pause during the webinar to answer questions and address any comments you have. And so, given that, let me go ahead and turn this over to Dr. Schumacher.
All right, thank you, Russ. On behalf of the Florida School Counselor Association, I do want to welcome all of our participants tonight to a very important topic, the cure for the Common Core. And so I also wanted to thank and introduce Nicole and Mark Duslak. Mark has been a school counselor, middle school, high school. He's doing some important research in the school counselor-principal relationship, and Nicole serves as assistant principal at Oakland Avenue Charter School. So without further ado, Mark and Nicole, welcome, and thank you again for presenting on a very important topic for school counselors. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Schumacher.
Yes,
we certainly appreciate the opportunity to present this information. I'd like to start with a little bit of a asterisk to our presentation. First off, it's an abbreviated version of what we gave at the Florida School Counselor Association's annual convention. We had a 3-hour window at that point to do our presentation, so this is going to be a little bit truncated from that. We're going to make up for that with some materials that we will be providing to Dr. Sabella, who will make it available on the website later on thereafter. So we may reference some things that we might just not have the time to address. Additionally, we're doing this from our home, which we have a small zoo of pets in our house. So if you hear growling or chirping, don't worry, we're okay on this end. We just have a lot of pets in our household, and we'll try to keep those distractions to a minimum. So without further ado, I'll get the presentation started here. First off, a little bit about us. My wife, Nikki Duslak, possesses several degrees, a Bachelor in Fine Arts from the University of the Arts, a Master's in Education from Loyola University. She also received her Educational Leadership and Policy Studies degree from the University of South Florida. She is probably one of the most qualified people to be giving this presentation because she's worked directly with Pearson, writing some assessments for the Common Core state standards. Some of her lessons have been published as exemplar lessons for the Common Core. She was also Sumter County's Teacher of the Year, and like you said, a current assistant principal. Myself, I have some degrees from University of Wisconsin-Madison, Loyola University. I also went to University of South Florida, where I received my Educational Leadership and Policy Studies degree. I have been a counselor for 5 years, but I've actually recently taken a position at the University of South Florida. I'm an academic advisor for international students. With similar work, and I do miss the counseling profession to a bit, but I certainly can bring to the table a lot of experience from the counseling end of things. So first off, just to give an idea of what this presentation isn't, we're not here to have a debate about the Common Core. On the same token, we're not going to advertise the Common Core or take a stance pro or con. We really just want to investigate the standards and help counselors understand how they can integrate the standards into their own practices. And also, we don't want this to turn into a gripe session talking just about the negatives or if there's any difficulties with the implementation of the Common Core. So we are going to present about the Common Core and how they are broad and they're going to impact the multiple levels of school counseling from K to 12. So it's important. Also, what we've done in our research and trying to understand how the Common Core impacts counselors, we had a difficult time finding materials. It seems to be scattered, minimal, and there's really not a lot of concentrated, relevant, or practical information. So that's something we hope to fill in this brief presentation. And third, we believe the Common Core state standards can bring attention to your counseling programs. Since the standards tend to be the focus of administrators and teachers, if there's a counseling program that's able to integrate the Common Core State Standards, that gets you some of that much needed attention, which can increase the buy-in from your administration. So the mission of the Common Core State Standards was to provide a consistent and clear understanding of what students are expected to learn so that teachers and parents know what they need to do to help them. The standards are designed to be robust, relevant to the real world, reflecting the knowledge and skills that our young people need for success in college and careers. With American students fully prepared for the future, our communities will be best positioned to compete successfully in the global economy. Just to hit on a couple key points that we see there, we're going to see the concept of college and careers and the notion of globalization come up a lot as we discuss these standards. So generally speaking, here are some good and bad points of the Common Core State Standards. First off, the focus, and we see this as a good point, is that rather than looking at test scores and basing everything, the success of a school upon that, they're looking at college and career readiness. It also creates a metric which allows students and programs to be compared fairly and equitably. It also takes away from teaching to the test, and the focus turns more towards supporting or scaffolding learning when students struggle. And this is an area that counselors, I think, just in their own practices have a lot of experience already. And also, it's relevant to college and career readiness. So there are some bad sides to the Common Core State Standards, of course. There is the test, and I think there's a big asterisk that comes to that Nikki was going to speak to in a little bit in terms of everything that's come up in recent history and what really needs to be. We're trying to give you the most up-to-date information. However, that seems to change every given day. There does seem to be some confusion about how the Common Core State Standards are going to be implemented. I think that's something that Nikki can help explain as well. I think this third bullet point pretty much says it all. There are a lot of mixed messages that we've been getting about the Common Core State Standards. It feels like sometimes we're gearing up for it, and then other times they're pulling back. Additionally, the point's been raised that not all schools are equal, so if you have the same standards, it's going to be easier or more difficult for certain schools to meet those standards. Additionally, you see the focus moving away potentially from art or creativity or those other considered soft subjects, and you see the focus returning to reading, writing, math. And also, the last and potentially for this audience most concerning is that with the focus shifting towards reading, writing, and math, counseling can be left behind, that character education piece, all those important things that we as counselors do. But hopefully this presentation can help show how counselors can integrate within this framework and continue to be relevant. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Nikki, who is going to begin with a primer on the Common Core State Standards.
So basically, if we look at the standards themselves, they're broken down. We have math, English language arts, and then you may or may not have heard some talk about history or science and technical subject standards. History and science and technical subjects are not necessarily standards for history, but they're more reading in the subject area of history, writing history and science, along with reading science and technical subjects, writing history and science. So there are not standards per se for history or science and technical subjects within the curriculum itself, but it all pertains to reading and writing within those subject areas. We're going to look at English language arts first. So English language arts is basically broken down into 4 categories. You have reading, writing, speaking and listening, and language. In the reading area, that's broken down into 2 separate pieces. You have literature and informational text. So as you look at the standards and the way they're broken down, you'll say ELA.RL or RI or ELA.W. That's for reading, literature, reading informational, or English language arts, writing. SL is speaking and listening, and L is language. So when you see those, now you know kind of what they're referencing. Math is broken down quite a bit differently. If you look on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see practice, and on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see content. So one of the nice things about the way that the Common Core has broken down math is that it's acknowledging that both the practice of math and the content of math are both equally important areas. So under the practice, you have things like making sense of problems, and to have students persevere within solving that, attending to precision, looking for and expressing regularity and repeated reasoning. Those are all elements that fall under that practice side of the math standards. If we look in content, we're talking about things like operations and algebraic thinking, geometry, expressions and equations, statistics and probability. So math is broken down quite a bit differently than those English language arts standards. So there are some instructional shifts that happen, and what that basically means is when you look at the way that classroom teachers are teaching their actual art and practice of teaching, there's some shifts that need to happen in order for them to be successful with these new Common Core standards. Let's look first at the shifts for English language arts. Anytime you see ELA, that's what they're referring to. So the first shift falls primarily for K through 5, so elementary teachers and counselors. This is particularly for you. We're talking about balancing informational and literary texts. So science, social studies, the arts, and literature should be taught through the text. This is particularly important in elementary schools because a lot of times what you'll hear is the adage of, in grades K through 2, we are teaching students, we're teaching them to learn how to read. And in 3 through 5, we're teaching them to read to learn. So there's that shift that occurs within elementary curriculum. And really it happens with the Common Core that we're saying the balancing of that, where science, social studies, the arts, and literature should all be being text-driven instruction. At least 50% of what students read should be informational text. And that comes from, our real-world lives. It's very rare that in your career you would pick up a piece of text that was not informational. Obviously there's reading for pleasure, but within the work world, really what you're going to be reading primarily is informational text. And the last part of that balancing is a focus on the foundational skills. So when we say that, we're talking about things like phonological awareness, phonics, word recognition, fluency. Shift 2 is primarily in grades 6 through 12, and that's knowledge and the disciplines. So content area teachers outside of English language arts emphasize literacy. We can no longer say, oh, well, I teach science or I teach social studies, so reading is not really my job. That's just something that can't really fly anymore. The second point to consider under that is that students learn through domain-specific texts in science and social studies. So what we mean by that is we're seeing a shift from referencing the text to actually acquiring the new information from the text, which is going to take some grappling on the part of your students. They may struggle. We always hear that our textbooks are written way above our students' level, but that's what the Common Core is calling for, a shift from, where we instruct them and then we say, oh yes, well, if there's a substitute, we'll have you read the chapter. We're shifting to you read the book to get the information. Shift 3 is a staircase of complexity. So if you think about the Common Core standards as an actual staircase, okay, every grade level is going to require a step of growth on that staircase. We'll do that through students reading central grade appropriate text around which that instruction is centered, which also means that you need time and space in your curriculum for close, careful reading and scaffolding. Students are going to struggle with this, especially at first when this is initially rolled out. If we look at Shift 4, text-based answers, so rigorous conversations that are dependent on text, along with classroom experiences. A lot of times that can include evidentiary arguments, so going back into that text. Well, you think the answer is the Boston Tea Party. Prove it. Show me. Where in the text do you find that answer? Shift 5 is writing from sources, so using evidence to inform or make an argument, tying back into that text-based answer, which is shift number 4, as opposed to a personal narrative and other types of decontextualized prompts. You know, we have the FCAT writing 2.0 now, which is very predictable. It's that 3-sentence, everyone has this, think about your this, now write this, and everybody knows it. We're shifting away from that, and we really need students to be able to make arguments that respond to texts that they have read. Shift 6 is academic vocabulary. Students are going to need to build their vocabulary in order to succeed with those texts that we are asking them to read. Focusing now on a comprehension of commonly found words. So when I taught 8th grade, you know, we were teaching things like onomatopoeia or homonym, these sort of esoteric literary terms that once you graduate college or you go into the workplace, unless you're working in writing or English, truly, when is the last time in the real world that anyone not in education needed to know what a onomatopoeia was? You know, it's just not something that's really helpful to the majority of students. Words like discourse, generation, theory, those types of words are certainly words that can carry over into college and career outside of a reading or writing classroom. And so we're shifting to sort of have those words be more of the focus. Let's look at some instructional shifts in math. So shift 1 is focus. We're talking about a narrowing and deepening of the scope. You know, we hear people say, well, that curriculum is a mile wide and an inch deep, or vice versa. So we're including less but covering it more. So a deep focus on the concepts that are prioritized in the standards. Shift 2 is coherence, so a connection of the learning within and across grades that will allow students to build new understanding onto their foundations. Shift 3 is fluency, so speed and accuracy with simple calculations is what we're basically talking about here. Class time and homework time that's structured for students to memorize core functions. So you have to be able to add and subtract before you can take it up to that next level, and providing students with the time they need to be able to get those concepts. Shift 4 is deep understanding. So students deeply understand that concept before moving on. And even just in my presenting, you can start to hear now how these are sort of circuitous. They all link together, these shifts. And students being able to deeply understand that concept before moving on, and they need to learn more than how to get the answer right. When I was in high school, especially in math, I could always get the answer right, but not necessarily know how I got it or be confident in the way that I got it. And it's interesting on that bullet point, because we hear people say all the time, well, I'm just not very good in math. But we never hear people say, oh, I'm just not a very good reader. And there's this weird sort of double standard that exists. And I think what they're getting at with the Common Core altogether is for it to make it sort of equally, an equal playing field, if you will. And what we're talking about here is getting students to be able to truly understand mathematical concepts. Shift 5, application. So students being able to choose the appropriate concept for application. So looking at those word problems and being able to say, oh, this is what I need to apply here. And shift 6 in the instructional shifts for math is that students are practicing and understanding. They're doing both. They're able to do it over and over and understand why and how they are completing it that way. So coming out of those instructional shifts and kind of looking at a timeline here, you can see the years and the grade levels in which implementation for the state standards were initially being rolled out. Again, some of this is a subject for change nowadays, but as of the original timeline, this is what we're looking at. So you can see that by 2014-15, we're talking full implementation in pretty much all grade levels. So let's address a couple of questions and common misconceptions. Are these national standards So the answer to that is no. The federal government is not involved in the development of the standards. And the states voluntarily adopt the standards based on the timelines and contexts within their states. Some misconceptions about quality. Well, people have said that adopting the Common Core standards will bring all states' standards down to the lowest common denominator. So basically what that means is that essentially some people worry that some states will be taking a step backwards. Well, the answer to that is that these standards were informed by the most rigorous standards in the country, the highest international standards, and with evidence and expertise about educational outcomes. They're designed to build upon the most advanced and current thinking. Basically what we're getting at then is, in theory, even the best state standards will arguably move up to that next level. There was an explicit agreement that no state would have to lower its standards if they chose to adopt these state standards. A misconception about content, the misconception being that the state standards only include skills and do not address the importance of content knowledge. So the standards recognize that both content and skills are important. So let's break that down. In English language arts, we're looking at critical content for all students. So basically what that means is things like classic myths, America's founding documents, foundational American literature, Shakespeare, remaining decisions about content area are made through state and local decision. If we look at math and misconceptions about content in math, having that solid foundation, the whole numbers, addition, subtraction, things of that nature, application of mathematical thinking to real-world issues and challenges, and the theoretical removal of piling topic upon topic. So again, adding that depth of understanding and ability to apply math to novel situations. Being able to solve, a 10-page problem doesn't really mean a whole lot if you can't take it into a novel situation that you would encounter in the real world. Misconceptions about process. So we have two misconceptions on this page. That a common misconception that I've heard, even as an assistant principal, is that, well, these standards, people don't write these knowing what they're talking about because, they certainly wouldn't have consulted with teachers because teachers would have known better or something to that extent. The truth is that the drafting process did rely on teachers and standard experts from across the country. And the other misconception being that they're not research or evidence-based. They were, in fact, research and evidence-based, scholarly research. They did some surveys on what skills were required for students entering college and workforce training programs. I'm sure everyone has heard, that statistic of exactly what percentage of students are ill-prepared for college, and it's different depending on, to whom you're speaking and what their goal of the conversation is, but you can't argue that there are quite a few students who are not ready. Assessment data was another contributing factor for college and career performance. They also compared standards to high-performing state standards and two other standards throughout the world. English language arts actually was built on the foundation of the NAEP frameworks, and math drew on conclusions from the TIMSS and other studies of high-performing countries, again, addressing that problem of the curriculum being a mile wide and an inch deep. So some misconceptions about implementation, that the standards are going to actually tell our teachers what to teach, and that's in fact not the truth. I know that when I was teaching and I first heard about this, I thought, well, great, they're just going to give me this script and it's going to be, that's how I have to teach it. The basic thought here is that the Common Core tells teachers sort of what the students need to learn, not how the teachers should teach it. Also, a misconception that I've heard is, these standards amount to a national curriculum for our schools. That was a big thing a while back. The fear of this being sort of federal overreach, especially with regard to that park assessment that we have now heard so much about. That the state of Florida has pulled out of the park partnership, but that did not necessarily mean that the park assessment itself was dead. It just meant that we pulled out of the partnership. And then the sort of buzz going around of, well, but if we gave up on the partnership, why would we still use their assessment? Basically, I think a lot of that stemmed from the concern about it being federal overreach. So first of all, to address this concern, the standards are not a curriculum. So when you hear people saying, well, this is a national curriculum, the standards are not a curriculum at all. The standards are a set of shared goals and expectations for what knowledge and skills will help our students succeed. Local teachers, principals, superintendents, etc., they will decide how those standards are to be met. And lastly, teachers, again, they're going to continue to generate those lesson plans and their instruction based on the individual needs of the students within their classrooms. Will common assessments be developed? Well, funny you should ask. In an albeit ever-changing nutshell, maybe. We can only assume that at some point states that have adopted the Common Core state standards will be coming up with some type of common assessment. So again, some states came together, they developed a common assessment or are developing a common assessment system based on those Common Core state standards, and that was PARCC. The goals of this basically were to allow for comparison across student schools, districts, states, nations, for people who were using this Common Core set of standards. It would create economies of scale, provide information and support more effective teaching and learning, and prepare students. Basically, there's a lot of concern right now with regard to this assessment. You know, is it going to be the PARCC assessment? Is it going to be this? Is it going to be that? Is it going to be FCAT 3.0? Basically, what I say to my teachers to sort of help calm their nerves, because it is very nerve-wracking to be teaching every day, not knowing exactly what it is that's going to be the thing that your students will face, essentially, especially with the new teacher evaluation. You know, teachers are instructing for a test that will essentially determine their pay, but they don't quite know what that test is. What I say to my teachers is, we can only assume that the state will choose a test that will link directly and be a reflection of the standards that we are using, regardless of the standards, whether it's Common Core state standards or the next standard they decide to throw our way. If we are teaching to the standards, it doesn't matter what test they put in front of us. We have to assume they will choose a test that is an accurate representation of those standards. So the state could give us a test and call it peanut butter and jelly, and as long as we've been teaching to the standards, our students will be prepared to face whatever it is that's put in front of them. So this again was the original standard and assessment timeline. You can see there in 2014-15 was the PARCC summative assessment would be operational. I've put a red no sign over that because the last we've heard, we've pulled out of the partnership. We can only assume that the PARCC test itself will not necessarily be what we go ahead and use. However, that has not even officially been said. So all we can do at this point, again, is to continue to instruct our students the best that we can to the standards that we currently have. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Mark, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about where school counselors come into this equation.
Well, it's a good thing I'm not on webcam here, because you'd have seen me kind of dozing off during that, just because it's so difficult for me to comprehend all of those changes, all of the different things. And really, the first time Nikki talked to me about it, what went through my mind was like, how does this apply to me? What's the point of all this? Isn't it just, you know, the reading and math teachers and nobody else? But the more that I came to learn about the Common Core state standards, the more I began to feel passionate that counselors do have a part in this process. So I'd like to start off by stating that as a student advocate and leader of college and career readiness within the school community, this author believes that it's imperative that school counselors are familiar with the language, theories, and data surrounding the Common Core standards, allowing them to effectively consult, counsel, and collaborate with students, parents, and school stakeholders, removing barriers to all students' college and career success. I found it interesting that they mentioned all. We as counselors tend to know what all means with regard to students, but I think that's an interesting shift in philosophy, at least, or mindset, that really moving towards every student being college and career ready. And I think that point is up to debate in the counseling community. So there's two big questions I'd like to answer is why is it relevant for counselors to understand the Common Core state standards, and then how do they impact counseling activities? Well, I think the relevance comes from the fact that the Common Core impacts a wide variety of entities both in and outside of the school, administrators, teachers, students, and parents. As counselors, we're often the face of that school. I know when I was a counselor, when that phone rang, I was usually the first person they referred to for the vast majority of questions. So being knowledgeable of that can help us both inform our community and actually work both ends of it too, with speaking with teachers, administrators, and parents on the topic. We also have to understand that there's a shift in focus of the curriculum, and what is relevant to an administrator or a teacher is changing. You're noticing more English language arts and more math. Well, what happened to career education? What happened to character education? All we're hearing about is college, right? What about running counseling groups or the social emotional aspects? So what I would argue is that there's a way to meld those two and integrate the two and still retain a lot of the core of what you do as a counselor, but advancing it with how the tide is changing in terms of with the standards enrolling. With regard to the counseling activities, I certainly don't want to insinuate that counselors need to change everything that they're doing. What we're hoping to do is make this easy for counselors to understand, okay, by shifting a few minor things within how I deliver my guidance curriculum, I can actually link myself to the Common Core state standards. But we have to understand, too, that a standard will define what a student should know, understand, or be able to do, but they don't define the method or the resource necessary to support students. And I think that's where counselors can become relevant and contribute their creativity. So just to kind of try to put a bow tie on this all, the big picture is that the Common Core state standards were designed looking backwards from what students should know as they enter college and then working all the way back to kindergarten. So it's a metric for whether or not you're on track. So at any given grade level, if you're meeting the standards, theoretically you're on track to be college and career ready. Now that's defined as someone who effectively navigates the pathways that connect education and employment to achieve a fulfilling, financially secure, and successful career. Now, we have seen in the research that there are three impacts of the Common Core state standards on the counselor's role. First of all, the Common Core state standards tend to create the need for counselors to adjust the content of classroom guidance and career development activities to align with outcomes for their school and their grade levels that they're serving. The second point is that counselors advocate to ensure all students are served under college and career ready initiatives. Remember, we saw that point all. And as counselors, sometimes we need to remind administration that this is all students, not just the ones that appear to be college and career ready. And also as counselors, within being that community contact, we need to help students and parents understand the changes affected by the Common Core state standards and the implication for the students. As you see the change in the standards, you're going to see a change in the way that the students react to being asked to work at a different level and a different type of thinking. And I would argue that Common Core impacts career, academic, and social counseling. You see the ideas of creating lifelong learning, facilitating adaptability to change, fostering a knowledge of careers. I certainly know in the career guidance that I provided as a counselor, understanding the world of work, providing skills that are relevant to specific careers, creating those dispositions of career readiness. For example, showing up on time, being able to see a project through to completion. You're also going to see an increased rigor in the work that students are expected to do. And I think as a result of that, we need to watch out for the social emotional consequences that may arise whenever a person is put under greater stress. So you can just see a general stress reaction, higher levels of anxiety. And there have been reports of as the academic rigor increases, students begin to equate grades and test scores with self-worth. And as counselors, we can help parse those, that joining of I'm only as good as my last test score. There's much more dynamic to what we define as self-worth, and as counselors, we can help facilitate for that for students. And lastly, I think counselors can help develop the dispositions relevant to school success. A lot of the different study skills, note-taking skills, just interacting in a community, teamwork. I could go on and on about it. But there are already areas that counselors contribute to the Common Core State Standards implementation. I believe counselors already collaborate with administrators, and they ensure that parents and students are educated and can understand the Common Core State Standards. Now that you have a primer on this from what Nikki had said, hopefully that's something that you can take with you to your schools and be able to be a little bit more knowledgeable of it. As I can attest, this is not something that you understand in just one sitting. You have to pursue it in a little more depth and over a little bit more time to truly understand all of which is coming down the pike. Also being able to manage the school-wide policies that come from student performance outcomes. With that shift towards college and career readiness, it really does change how we look at scheduling and placement, even though scheduling is not necessarily the top task of a counselor. They oftentimes do have a say in that, but more so designing like the remedial support for students, as well as establishing support structures such as tutoring within the academic environment. Also, counselors are expected more and more to understand and be able to disaggregate test data. So as whichever test it is that arises, counselors are going to be looked upon to be able to identify the performance barriers and equity gaps. And I think that we're in a unique position to bring the idea of equity to the table. A lot of times that may be overlooked by other entities within the school because their obligations may shift their focus elsewhere, but I think a counselor is in a unique position to be able to directly address equity issues. Also being able to make recommendations to the administration or leadership team, and then to be able to have a say in the interventions that are in place to fill these performance gaps. So I'd like to break this down now for the different levels of counselors, and I hope that this is pertinent for whichever level of counselor you may be. I'll start with elementary counselors. So first off, I do not work for College Board or anything like that, but I do have to say that they come up with some great resources. A quick web search, or actually at the end of our presentation in our resources page, you'll see a link to the Elementary School Counselor's Guide. And the first thing that you notice, even just looking at the title, is you see that college and career readiness. So immediately you know that what's contained in there is going to be relevant and is going to translate to a lot of the mission and vision of the Common Core State Standards. Now looking at areas of focus and delving into what the College Board believes elementary counselors should consider. And I tend to agree with them as these Common Core State Standards roll out. They look at the following areas to be addressed in the guidance curriculum, which include college aspirations, enrichment and extracurricular engagement, college and career assessments, college affordability planning, career exploration and selection. And you can already start to see that there is some crossover with the career guidance that counselors already provide. I think when I first saw this for elementary, I guess maybe this is just me speaking as a middle school or high school counselor, I couldn't believe the depth of knowledge that was being presented for students to expect to know. And with regards to knowledge of colleges, I believe that it goes all the way down to first grade where they're starting to say developing an awareness of colleges, which to me was a little bit hard to wrap my mind around. But there are some great example activities that manual has. I wanted to highlight a few that were listed that I thought were especially pertinent to elementary counselors. So I think just generally counselors can help a student understand their area of interest and link a strength of theirs to an academic subject. making that connection to help them understand of where they can go with their skills. If you have a propensity for math, for example, steering them towards STEM careers or majors or academic subjects related to that. And we see the tried and true concepts of the emotional intelligence ideas of patience, persistence, resiliency, fostering imagination and creativity. As Nikki highlighted earlier, a lot of the questions that are asked of these students are not going to just be, answer this multiple choice question and circle the right answer based upon factual recall. The shift is going much more toward being able to take what you know and develop a skill or an understanding or a disposition and then utilize it in a novel situation. So imagination and creativity become paramount. Another activity is fostering that exploration of students' likes, dislikes, hobbies, and interests, and connecting that to work and career. So now we're moving beyond just academic subjects, but also what do you like to do outside of school, and how does that work? How could you develop a career that would help you meet that? And then providing students with information, right? As counselors, I know we all have those file cabinets that are just full of information for our students. And I think this is something that the Common Core state standards are going to push even harder, is that students should develop a fluency of understanding of the college process and navigate it. And you'll see as this presentation goes on that as we move up in the grades, you're going to see the focus moves even more so towards understanding the college and career world. And just to show you as an example how the rigor steps up, I'm not going to read all of this, so you can take a sigh of relief, but you can just see from kindergarten, which is that top bullet point, down to grade 5, just the magnitude that the standards increase in terms of the understanding for students. And I think that that poses a challenge both to the students in terms of what they're expected to know, but also to the teachers, because the amount of understanding for the teachers and being able to get through all the material so that students are prepared as the next grade. As if they weren't stressed enough, you're going to see, in my approximation, a higher degree of teacher stress as a result of these increase in rigor. So let's talk about middle school counselors for a moment here. So there are a lot of the same areas that elementary counselors were asked to focus upon. The College Board recommends middle school counselors focus as well. We see the same themes of college aspiration, career exploration, enrichment and extracurricular engagement is pursued a little bit more, I think more so for middle school counselors. And the same of planning for college and careers and affordability planning as well. So some activities here that they highlighted was to help students. You'll see a focus here more towards the knowledge, skills, and dispositions, right? Dispositions meaning studying, test-taking skills, and higher-order thinking, skills to attain proficiency or higher in key academic areas, and using college and career readiness as a content base for teaching these transferable skills. So not only showing a student how to study or take a test, but then integrating that within the college and career readiness framework, I think is what we're seeing the shift toward. Teaching students how to identify and research college and career and technical programs that offer programs that are pertinent to them. And also teaching students how to use assessment results. Again, that goes back to a point I made earlier, that counselors are going to be asked to interpret the test scores, but not just for administrators or for the teachers, but to help the students understand where they are as well, and as well to put into perspective what a test score is and ultimately what it means about, to that student, and that it's not necessarily the end-all be-all measure of your self-worth. You can see again the increased rigor in math, even just as we move from grade 6 to grade 8. In grade 6, we're looking at whole number multiplication. By the time we're in grade 8, we're talking about expressions, equations, modeling, and bivariate data and linear equations, and just kind of a mind-blowing jump in terms of the expectations. But then again, these are the standards that students are expected to be at, to reach, in order to be deemed college or career ready. So, I mean, there is some relevance to it, even though some of us may look at it and say, wow, this is a heavy load to shoulder. Lastly, and I think some may argue most importantly, the high school counselors are going to be impacted by this shift toward the Common Core. You're going to see the same areas as the elementary and middle school, but they add 2 additional areas. One is they look for counselors to develop student fluency in understanding the college and career admission process so that they're able to navigate it with little difficulty, and that they aren't experiencing surprises in their pursuit of moving on to college or career. And also planning for that transition from high school graduation to college enrollment. And like I said before, a lot of counselors are probably doing this already, but I think the shift here that's important to keep in mind is that we're not just looking at graduation rate anymore. We're looking at where are these students going. We're ensuring that there's a path beyond the door of the high school and a plan that accompanies it. So some example activities that I just wanted to quickly highlight as our time becomes a little bit scarce here was that you know, as a high school counselor, you may want to ensure that students are aware of the different enrollment options. I know in Florida we're lucky enough to have the 2+2 program. We had a great debate about that in our FSCA presentation, as well as dual enrollment and part-time enrollment, and all the various ways that a student can connect with college and careers, and helping the student to understand these personal changes ahead. And we can focus on that social aspect, right? How are you going to plan to address these difficulties, leaving your familiar surroundings or a high school environment to the much more free environment of a college atmosphere? To move on, where we see potential challenges, I'm going to go back to elementary grades. First of all, within the parents, and I think Nikki will nod when I say this, is that sometimes at the elementary level, I think the parents can be the most involved in their child's education, and sometimes a little bit of misunderstanding can go a long way in terms of igniting the community. So a lack of understanding. I know a refrain we heard was that there's going to be tests every day, and being able to dissuade that and assure parents that, you know, there is a strong foundation to the Common Core state standards. Looking at teachers, you're going to see a lot of stress on the teacher's part of being able to manage and reconcile these instructional shifts. One thing that I think was interesting was within the standards you don't see things addressed such as being able to read an analog clock, or you don't see a push towards cursive writing anymore. Now everything's digital, of course, but to some that may be a bitter pill to swallow or a hard thing to adapt to. Looking at administration, understanding, you know, the ideas of equity, and ensure, you know, with administrators, how are they going to help create a learning environment that's equitable to all students. And then seeing, you know, for students, helping them fill in the gap of these soft skills that perhaps aren't on the forefront of, you know, what's being spoken of in their classrooms, and working with academic frustration. Like Nikki had said, at the level of 3rd grade, you're seeing the shift from learning how to read to reading to learn about the subjects. And for some students, that may not be on time with on par with their level of learning. At the middle grades, as the rigor increases, you can expect to see students dealing with the typical problems that accompany a student not achieving at you know, their expectations. The ideas with test anxiety too also come up. And a question that I think yet goes unanswered is, as the gap widens for ESE, ESOL, or low socioeconomic students, how do counselors advocate and provide support and structures necessary for high levels of academic achievement? And again, we see that word, all students. So how are we going to address those populations? And lastly, at the high grades, you see, you know, there's this shift from just getting out the door and completing high school to becoming career and college ready. And that certainly is going to impact the goals of your counseling program and the curriculum of your counseling program. And I think that begins to shed light on a stress towards increasing the visibility and access of colleges. Looking at the standards too, the rigor had increased throughout from K to 12, but as you move into high school, you see the thinking becomes much more abstract. And I've used two there. I think one is a kindergarten standard on the right, and on the left is an 11th, 12th grade standard. And you see the difference between asking and answering questions about unknown words to all the way using textual evidence to support analysis and making inferences and those kind of very high-level thinking activities. One thing I wanted to point out very quickly, too, is that what I think the Common Core state standards may overlook is that at the younger ages, a difference in IQ doesn't become apparent until much older on in life. So what I wanted to use this was an example. This was given to me by a school psychologist to showcase that, for example, if you have a 6th grade student, a 6th grade student who happens to be 1 year behind you, or you can see if a student's scoring 100 IQ, they're right on par. So they're at year 1. I'm sorry, that was a 6-year-old student. So right there, they're at year 1. If you look at them with an IQ of 90, they are about 0.6 of a year behind. Now, if you fast forward all the way to, let's say, 11th grade, looking at those same IQ differences, you can see that there's more than over a year of difference between those two students. And I think that's something that we as counselors need to keep in mind, that as students grow older, that difference becomes more significant. The way that they handle problems in higher order thinking, that gap widens, and we need to address how are we going to adapt our practices, because again, we're looking at all students being college and career ready. How are we going to adapt our practices so that the students who may not have the highest IQ are still able to have that access and knowledge? So I'd like to just very quickly connect the Common Core and ASCA. So ASCA developed state standard or national standards for students, pardon me, and I'd like to just show kind of a through line to the Common Core state standards. As we look at the ASCA standards, you see 3 main areas: academic development, career development, and personal social development. Common Core focuses on math and English language arts. English language arts is broken down further into reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go into all of these bullet points, but this kind of shows how they square up against each other. You can see that the ASCA standards tend to be much more broad and can encompass a wide variety of subjects, whereas the Common Core state standards tend to be driven to a very specific subject matter. And at this point, I am going to pass it back to Nikki, who is going to help counselors understand how to read a standard here.
All right, thank you. And also, Nikki, before you go, I just want to remind people we have a few minutes left, so if you have any questions, now would be the time to type those in.
Great, thank you, Dr. Spell.
As we look at how to sort of read these standards, ASCA breaks it down domain, standard, competency, indicator. The Common Core breaks it down pretty much the opposite, which is so helpful when you're trying to understand them. And for those of you that are familiar with the Next Generation Sunshine State Standards, NGSSS, I think. I always lose track of my S's. Those of you that are familiar with the Next Generation Sunshine State Standards, they do it completely differently as well. But when you're looking at Common Core, that strand, that's going to be writing. The next number you see is the grade level. The next number you see is the cluster or domain. And the last thing you see there is the standard. So they're kind of opposite, just for familiarity's sake as you're reading the standards. So as we dissect them, again, the domain with ASCA is the academic, career, or personal social. The standard is the group of competencies. A competency is a group of indicators, and the indicator is the smallest unit of the standard. Looking at the Common Core, the strand, that's your main topic. Again, the reading, informational, writing, speaking and listening, etc. The next one's the grade level. Domain is the area within the topic, and the standards are what define what the students should be able to do and understand. So if you have the standards in front of you at this point, we would have you kind of do a scavenger hunt. If we're looking at standard RL 7.1.2, we're talking reading for literature in grade 7, cluster 1, which is key ideas and details, and it's standard 2. So we would have you go and find that. We'll obviously skip that since you're not in front of us. We look at some areas of continued concern and needs. Again, students who are ESC and ESOL, issues of equity and removal of education of the whole child are all concerns that counselors are going to face. So as we kind of wrap up here, where can you go for help or more information? cpoms.org or icpoms.org are wonderful resources for you. There are published exemplary lessons. There's a Common Core app by Mastery Connect. It's free. The icon for that's in the bottom right section of your screen at the moment. I am that weirdo, I guess, that has that on my phone, and I'm constantly referencing it when we're in staff meetings and I'm on my phone. Everybody knows I'm looking at the Common Core app. You also have coursestandards.org. There's some great videos on coursestandards.org. They're 1, 2, 3 minutes long, and they're wonderful illustrations that can help you out as well. These are some resources that we have for our presentation, and this presentation, again, we are available to come out and do professional development in a longer format with more information, and the handouts that we have are actually sample lessons that counselors can take that link the ASCA National Standard to the Common Core to help you build lessons that you can either co-teach with teachers in a subject area or to be able to go out and teach on your own. And we have some sample lesson plans that we can provide for you that actually provides you with a crosswalk and a sort of linking up of some of the ASCA standards to some of the Common Core state standards, and doing a sort of integration of the two curriculums into one area, again, as Mark said earlier, to sort of make yourself indispensable to your organization, that you are well versed in these standards and are incorporating them into your guidance curriculum, because I guarantee you that 98% of counselors are already doing that. They're already touching on some part of the Common Core. It's just having the knowledge and the wherewithal to be able to go and find the proof that you are doing it, and kind of use those standards to back up, deepen, and enrich the curriculum which you are already teaching.
We have probably about 60 seconds to answer questions. We have one up here. It says, "Hi, Mark. Can you explain the IQ chart again, please? I thought I had it." Maybe you can just take a few seconds, Mark, and go over that one more time.
I'm going to get back to that slide if we can with time. The idea was that and I'll use a different example because I think I was kind of getting through it quickly and didn't really have it. But let's look at a student who has a 95 IQ and has an 85 IQ. Now, at the top, the IQ is on the y-axis. My math is coming back to me. And then at the top on the x-axis, you're going to see that's the age of the child as well as their grade level. So where you see 5K, that's a 5-year-old student in kindergarten. Now, let's just look at a second grade student. So that's the 7/2. With an IQ of 95, that student is 1.6 is at 1 year and 6/10 of a grade level. So they're at grade 1.6, right? A student with an IQ of 85 is at a 0.95. So they're not even at a first grade level yet, starting second grade. But you can see as you move forward in that chart, the main idea here is not necessarily the exact differences, but the main idea is as you move forward here, if you just look at that 95 level and that 85 level and you move to all the way the 9th grade column where it's 14/9, that's the third from the right, you'll see, for example, the student with a 95 IQ is at the 8th grade level, it's 8.3, so 3/10 of the way into their 8th grade year. Comparing that to a 9th grade student with an 85 IQ, though, they're only not even touching the 7th grade level. So they're more then a year behind. And you can see that that gap widens as students grow older. So for, I guess the point that we were trying to stress here was that with the push towards college and career readiness, IQ is going to become an important factor in showcasing kind of how we're going to adapt to different learning abilities across students.
All right, very good. We may get shut down here in just a few seconds, so we better finish up. Becky, let me get you back on here, see some final words. Again, we will have a replay up, and I know you've got some handouts that we'll make available for download.
I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you, Nikki, and thank
Nicole?
you and Mark for your contribution to all the Florida school counselors and the good work that you're doing with Common Core. So thanks so much for this presentation tonight. I know for me, I really have come away learning quite a bit, so thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Great. And I'm also going to ask that if Russ could provide our contact information if someone has any questions beyond this with our limited time, I'll be sure to provide that to him as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.